answer any questions that I can then. So thank you so much, and we'll get started on our presentation. So hold on just a minute here while we do some maneuvering around here. All right, so now we're going to start Soldiers in Skirts, how to join the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps during World War II. Of course, this is kind of inspired before we get started on just how you join the WAAC. We're going to talk a little bit about some of what brings us to this time in history. And of course, we can't talk about World War II without bringing up First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. Here you see her in her Red Cross uniform as she traveled throughout the country, and throughout the Pacific, doing several tours of visiting the military wounded and soldiers throughout the war. What I'm showing you here on the right-hand side is a little photo album that she carried with her of all four of her sons. All four of her sons served in World War II, very courageously, by the way, very courageously. So very interesting little tidbit there. Of course, Eleanor spoke when the very night that Pearl Harbor was attacked. And this is a copy of, showing you the copy of her speech that she gave over the radio. I'd like to call your attention down to the very bottom on the left-hand side, where she says, "I should just like to say a word to the women in the country tonight. I have a boy at sea on a destroyer. For all I know, he is on his way to the Pacific. 2 of my children are in the coast cities on the Pacific. Many of you all over this country have boys in the service who will now be called upon to go into action." And then on the right-hand side, she finishes it with, "To the young people of the nation," and I'm sorry, I can't read her writing there, but you are going to have a great opportunity, high moments in which your strength and your ability will be tested. I have faith in you. And then she says that they're going to go back to the next subject, which is Army morale. So I wanted to show you this. Also within our collection, we have a letter that she wrote that very night, December 7th, 1941, to Harry Hopkins. She's already getting ready to leave the White House, and she's saying she's leaving by plane for Los Angeles, and that she doesn't know that she'll be back in time to go to theater. But what I love about this little letter that she writes is she just signs the ER, and then she writes, "What a world," which is very kind of how I think we can all relate to that after 9/11 and some of the very traumatic things, crises that our country goes through. So now we'll get started with women and how they're kind of a little bit of an overview of how they got into how women are involved in war. And they have been involved in war since the very beginning. They've generally here in this country, whether it was tending the wounded, Abigail Adams during the Revolutionary War was taking her silver and melting it down and making silver bullets with it. Women have always been a part of war. Most of the time they were volunteering their services. Such as during the Civil War, very famous Louisa May Alcott, Clara Barton were volunteer women and really getting the Red Cross started for the nursing facilities. But it wasn't until the Spanish-American War, that the U.S. Army formed a nursing corps that was established in 1901. And these nurses were considered contractual employees. During the Spanish-American War in 1898, over 1,500 nurses signed contracts with the Army. Though the war officially ended on October 12, 1898, over 200 nurses were kept on active duty to care for the thousands of soldiers suffering from an epidemic of typhoid fever that claimed thousands of lives. Of those, 12 of these nurses also died of typhoid fever. And afterwards, the Surgeon General established the U.S. Army Nurse Corps on June 20th, 1899. It passed Congress on February 2nd of 1901. The U.S. Army Nursing Corps became a permanent corps of the medical department under the Army Reorganization Act. This was a reserve corps of a list of nurses that were required to report to the Surgeon General every 6 months and report for active duty whenever required. So up came World War I, and there weren't just nurses involved in the war effort. Women were now going out in the fields and helping the farmers. Here's a picture of the farmerettes working in the fields so that the men could go and fight. There were also, the Army created the Army Signal Corps, and these operators were called Hello Girls. And they were paid the same as male soldiers, except that the Army would not supply their uniforms. They did not have military rank and were considered by the Army as contracted civilian workers. They were not considered veterans after their service and not entitled to armed forces, discharges, ribbons, or medals. No military standing, and if a prisoner of war in an internment camp, they were without protection of the U.S. under the rules of war. There were 223 Hello Girls who served overseas. Veteran status, however, was finally granted to these women in 1979, but only a few of them were alive to see this victory. On Armistice Day at the end of World War I, which was November 11th, 1918, 21,480 Army nurses were on active duty, and more than 10,000 of them were serving overseas in France, England, Belgium, Italy, Serbia, Philippines, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico. The 1918 influenza epidemic claimed the lives of over 200 of these Army nurses. On November 13th, 1918, 18 Negro Army nurses, Black Army nurses, were assigned to work with the Black soldiers at Camp Grant in Illinois and Camp Sherman in Ohio. This was progress, that they were finally allowed to work as in the Army. The Army always wanted women of all races and creeds. Once the war, let's go back. Once the war was over, once the war was over, all these women were expected to return to the status quo and return to their traditional domestic roles and service. They couldn't do all the wonderful things that they've been doing during World War I. However, 1920 comes along and women win the right to vote. Congressman Edith Nourse Rogers. She was a representative from Massachusetts who introduced a bill to establish the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, or WAAC, on May 28, 1941. This was not her original intent, but it was one she felt could pass and become law. She wanted a nursing corps that was within the US Army, not working with the Army, nor because they didn't receive the same protection or military status. The War Department and the US Army were not willing to grant women full military status at the time, but she hoped at least to get a law passed so another could succeed it during the women and get women the military status, equal pay, and benefits that they needed. Edith Nourse Rogers, she was very well equipped to understand this problem. She accompanied her husband, John Rogers, to France in 1917 when he was on the Foreign Affairs Committee. And she worked for the Women's Overseas Service League, inspecting field hospitals of the American military. She was very impressed by the British military nurses who had military status and legal protection. Upon returning to the States, she continued to volunteer with the American Red Cross at Walter Reed Hospital with the veterans and active duty soldiers. President Harding appointed her as a president assistant to work with as presidential assistant to work with disabled veterans in 1921. And President Coolidge and Hoover also appointed her to the same position until 1925, when her husband, John, died. In a special election, she ran for her husband's seat and won 72% of the vote on June 30th, 1925. She was the 7th woman to serve in the House of Representatives and the first from a New England state. And this lovely woman was elected to office 18 times. Edith was a powerhouse with firsthand knowledge of how women volunteered to serve with the US military during World War I. As a suffragette, she fought for the right for women to serve in the military. She had witnessed the gender discrimination of American women serving overseas without protection, and should they become wounded, killed, or taken prisoner of war. She knew that they were without veterans' benefits and no military discharge with a record existed of their service. Yet they were very important in winning the victory of the Great War. The majority of the American society still held very narrow, defined gender roles and were shocked by women serving in the military, let alone within the military. The military itself was very opposed, as was the majority of Congress and the civilian population. Women were very stereotyped into very narrow gender roles of domesticity. Here are some of the concerns that were raised on the floor of the US House. No man would take orders from a woman. Women generals would be giving orders to men. Take the woman into the armed service, who then will do the cooking, the washing, the mending, the humble, homey tasks to which every woman has devoted herself. And finally, think of the humiliation. What has become of the manhood of America? Well, after the attack of Pearl Harbor, the surrender of Guam and the Philippines, the War Department and the military and Congress changed their attitudes. On January 28, 1942, Edith Rogers reintroduced the bill, and it was approved and sent to the Senate, where it was approved on February 9th, 1942. After the Battle of Bataan, the US military surrendered Manila Bay, and over 100 Army and Navy nurses became prisoners of war of the Japanese on May 6, 1942. 8 days later, on May 14th, the bill to establish the American Army Auxiliary Corps passed Congress, and the next day was signed into law by President Roosevelt. However, These women had no military status nor system of equal rank or pay. This is Veda Kulp Hobby. She was a publisher and vice president of the Houston Post and the wife of a former Texas governor. She was sworn in as the first director of the WAAC. She was the highest ranking woman officer in the WAAC, but she came with really good credentials. She graduated from the University of Texas with a law degree, served on the board of directors of Claiborne National Bank. She was president of the Texas League of Women Voters, as well as being the executive vice president of the Houston Post. She was tapped by the War Department to lead the newly conceived WAAC after serving as the chief of Women's Interest Section and with the Bureau of President for Public Affairs and the chief of pre-planners for the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps. And by the way, she had 2 small children at this time. They were 9 and 6 when she started this work. So let's look now at what it is, the Women's Corps Army Auxiliary Corps. This is a pamphlet that I've actually scanned. It's something that's in our collection. And so we're going to go by it page by page so that you can share it with me because we're all doing this virtually. Of course, it tells you here that it is a corps of women in military uniform and under military discipline organized for non-combat service with the Army. It is the only women's organization exclusive of the Army Nurse Corps authorized to serve with the Army. It offers American women, regardless of race, color, or creed, an exceptional opportunity for service. How is WAAC set up? It's an organization along the military lines, and it includes a director, assistant directors, field directors, first, second, and third officers, and enrolled members. The enrolled members have the equivalent grades and pay of enlisted men of the Army. In general, an applicant must be in good health. She must have good eyesight and good hearing. Her heart must be competent to stand the stress of physical exertion. She must be intelligent enough to understand and execute orders. Decision as to acceptance with respect to physical qualifications will be determined following examination by an Army medical examiner. What about married women and mothers of families? If you are married, you may enroll in WAAC, but no woman will be accepted who has anyone financially dependent on her pay as a member of WAAC. And mothers of children under 14 are not eligible for enrollment if such children would thus be deprived of maternal care. And then you see on the second page to our right here, some examples of women working in action. Here's a woman looking under a microscope, and we have a switchboard operator down below. What you will do in the WAAC. Women will join the WAAC in order to take the places of men in non-combatant positions and release them for frontline duty. Listen to that carefully, because that little sentence is causes some real hard things that happen. Going on, the classes of duties to which members of WAAC are assigned at present include accountants, aircraft warning personnel, bakers, bookkeepers, bookkeeping machinery operators, cadre clerks, camera technicians, cashiers, chauffeurs, classification specialists, cooks, clerks, dispatchers of motor vehicles, draftsmen, librarians, machine record operators, message center clerks, messengers, mimeograph operators, musicians, photo laboratory technicians, postal clerks, radio operators, radio repairmen, sales clerks, statisticians, stenographers, stock record clerks, telegraph printer operators, telephone operators, teletype operators, truck drivers, typists, weather observers. Can you imagine, if you will, being a woman in 1941 who has not had any opportunity except in your small town to be given this wonderful list of possibilities? How will you be trained in the WAAC? You will be enrolled as an auxiliary. You will at once be given the basic training, which lasts 4 weeks and consists of Army orientation, drill, physical training, and such subjects as mess management, map reading, and military sanitation. At the completion of this training, you'll be given a series of aptitude tests to determine what type of work you will be best fitted for in your service with the Army. Based on these tests, you will be sent to a specialist school. These schools include administration, motor transport, bakers and cooks, communications, and radio. As the Corps expands, other types of specialist training will be added. The discipline, as well as the training of the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, is along military lines. As a member of the WAAC, you will be governed by the code of conduct established in WAAC regulations. Your opportunities for promotion. By executive order of the President dated November 20th, 1942, the WAAC are authorized an increase to approximately 6 times its originally established strength. This expansion creates almost unlimited opportunities for advancement of enrollment members who have demonstrated ability to positions of responsibility and authority. These include ratings corresponding to non-commissioned officer grades in the Army, as well as promotion to commissioned rank. May you become an officer. As an enrolled member of the WAAC, you will have an equal opportunity to compete for appointment and attendance at officer candidate school. All officer candidates are now selected from the ranks of enrolled members. Who may join? An applicant must be a woman citizen of the United States, be between 21 and 44 years of age inclusive, submit satisfactory proof of date of birth and citizenship, have excellent character, present 2 character references from responsible business or professional people in her community, not relatives, who are personally acquainted with the applicant's ability. Pass a mental alertness test, qualify according to the following height and weight chart. And there you see on your right-hand side, you've got inches. Your height goes from 5 feet to 6 feet. So, and depending how old you are, that's how much you should weigh. Wow. More may wives of men in the armed services join the WAAC. If you are the wife of a man in service, you are eligible, subject to the foregoing requirements for enrollment in the WAAC. Many wives, as well as mothers and sisters of servicemen, are already enrolled in its ranks and thus are finding opportunity to do their part in winning the war. May students enroll. If you are attending college or business school and meet the above qualifications, you may enroll in the WAAC. Upon your request, you will be permitted to remain in inactive status upon completion of the current school year or the school course for which you're enrolled, if such course can be completed in less than 1 year. Length of service. Your term of service in the WAAC is for the duration of the war, plus a period of not more than 6 months thereafter. Furloughs. As a member of the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, you are entitled to a total of 30 days leave of furlough, or per year, provided your services can be spared. Grades and pay in the WAAC. As an enrolled member, you will receive the monthly pay of your comparable grade in the Army, which follows. And you can see that the very top is the first leader, who gets a pay of $138, to the auxiliary, the private, which gets $50. And on the right-hand side, we see more really great pictures of women exercising in their exercising uniforms. And below that, we see a woman with a saw. she is preparing the meat for the mess hall. Other benefits of the WAAC. You will live in comfortable and attractive quarters, especially planned for women. Each of the WAAC barracks has a pleasant, well-furnished day room where you may enjoy games and music when off duty. Appetizing, well-balanced meals are prepared by women cooks training in the WAAC, and when meals are not furnished, a cash allowance is paid. Medical and dental services, hospitalization, medicines, and other appropriate health services are provided at government expense for all members of the WAAC. As a member, you are entitled to benefits under the United States Employees Compensation Act. You will also receive the benefits provided by the Soldiers and Sailors Civil Relief Act of 1940. Uniforms. Members of the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps wear distinctive uniforms with insignia and accessories, all supplied by the government. These include summer and winter uniforms and special clothing for athletics, mechanical work, bakers and cooks, and other duties. Your service in the WAAC. As a member of the WAAC, you will be enrolled for non-combatant duties. You may be assigned to duty with a WAAC unit composed of 50 or more members to wherever the Army is serving at home or abroad. And where you may join the WAAC. You may go to any United States Army recruiting and induction station. There you may obtain additional information, application blanks for enrollment. Mini-WAAC officers are now on duty at these stations, and they will tell you how, by releasing a man from frontline service, you can help to win the war by joining the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps. The first WAAC training center was set at Fort Des Moines in Iowa. It was an old US cavalry post, and after renovations, it became the barracks for the first 770 women to join WAAC. These women were some of the first over time to live away. These women for the very first time were living away from their home, towns, and near their parents. But this was a chance to do their patriotic part and win the war by freeing a man for combat. That was told to them over and over again, and they firmly believed it and worked hard to do that. The first clothing issued were men's army issue and grossly oversized for the majority of the women. The first class was trained by male soldiers and gradually replaced by other trained women. The first class of graduating WAAC officers was on August 29, 1942. There were 440 women, and 40 of these women were Black. Though they went to class and ate in the same mess hall with their white classmates, they had a separate all-Black platoon. The second WAAC training center opened on November 21st, 1942 at Daytona Beach, Florida. And I wanted to show you this picture because this is Daytona Beach, and you can see the palm trees, and they're right standing in front of the swimming pool there. This was kind of problematic. Unlike Fort Des Moines, classrooms were set up in local churches, and since there were no barracks, rooms were scattered in inns, villas, hospitals, and apartment buildings, and also in a camp of tents. The third WAAC training center was Fort Oglethorpe, which opened December 23rd, 1942 in the Piedmont of the Appalachian Mountains 1902 Army Post located in the Chickamauga National Park. And finally, Fort Devens outside Boston was the fourth training center, which opened March 1st, 1943. Early on, there were 5 major areas that the women were assigned work. Aircraft warning service units along the East Coast, field positions with the Army Air Force, Army Grounds Forces, and the Army Service Forces. There were women trained as, in addition to those, the things that you saw, there were women that were trained as parachute riggers, bomb site maintenance specialists, control tower operators, aerial photography analysts, instructors who taught pilots to fly by using instruments, and ordnance specialists who worked with explosives, mixing gunpowder and loading shells. There were also women who were trained as electricians, automobile and plane mechanics. The Navy also, at this time, came right after the Army in having a Navy Women's Reserve, which become the WAVES, the Women's Accepted for Voluntary Emergency Service. This bill was passed for the Navy in July 30th of 1940. Unlike the WAAC uniforms, the WAVE uniforms were designed by a fashion designer. His name was Mainbacher, and he was a former editor of Vogue. He volunteered his time and talent to the Department of the Navy for the Women's Naval Reserve. The WAVES wore navy blue in the winter and white in the summer. Most considered these women to be the best dressed in the world. WAACs were issued, their uniforms were selected by the men of the Army's Quartermaster Corps, and they were issued Army issued khaki underwear. Unlike the Navy. The Navy could purchase their own underwear, but the poor WAACs, they were rugged. They wore the khaki underwear. There were also other groups of women serving. Lots of them came up here. You're seeing the WAVES or the SPARs. This was the Coast Guard, was the SPARs. The Coast Guard Academy was established in December of 28th of 1942, becoming the SPARs. And the U.S. Marine Corps Women's Reserve began training in February 13th of 1943. The growth in the military of including women included so many different women corps that surprisingly it did not lead to much competition between these women. They really supported one another in their service. They understood that they were a sisterhood. It didn't matter who you served with. You were one of them serving for the war. And the different military branches had robust recruitment. And so it meant that the Army was having a hard time filling its quota after a time. And there was actually a bill that came up in Congress called the Austin-Wadsworth Plan for the WAACs to create so that they could fulfill their numbers that they were being asked for. They were being asked for about 100,000 more growth in new women. And so this plan was introduced to ask women between the ages of 18 and 50 to be drafted. Unfortunately, this bill failed to become law and never got past the House. But it was heavily discussed in the media. And so it got a lot of, it was a very controversial thing that was going on. Soon, not only that, but unfortunately, there were troubles abroad for these pioneering women. There were stories about the morals of the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps and their public actions, such as drinking heavily in public and sleeping with men openly. Another problem was that some of the stories turned out to not be WAACs at all. They were civilian women who had purchased the uniform or close copies of them from department stores. And I'm showing you here, this is an advertisement from Boyd Johnson showing you that you could buy your WAAC uniform. Many times the WAAC staff had trouble getting all the uniforms they needed, while manufacturers bought large quantities to make and sell exact copies of the WAAC uniform. By the late spring of 1943, rumors began to circulate that large numbers of pregnant WAACs were being sent back from overseas assignments. Prostitutes were buying the uniforms and making it easier for access to hotels that were located near military posts. And the rumors spread that 90% of the WAACs were prostitutes. Then one of the worst controversial things that happened during this time was the syndicated columnist John O'Donnell wrote in his Capital Stuff a column, and this was on June 8th, that, I quote, "Contraceptives and prophylactic equipment will be furnished to the WAAC according to a super secret agreement reached by high-ranking officers of the War Department and the WAAC chieftain, Mrs. William Pettus Hobby. It was a victory for the New Deal, ladies. Mrs. Roosevelt wants all the young ladies to have the same overseas rights as their brothers and fathers." And this caused so much problems for the Army that there was a G2 division, Army intelligence, that did an extensive investigation. And they also reported then that the rumor had no basis. The Army intelligence issued a statement that the super secret agreements were actually pamphlets handed out to the women on sex hygiene that were facts about menstruation, menopause, female anatomy, and the nature and dangers of venereal disease. The pamphlets did not mention contraceptives or other forms of birth control. But public comments about the Capitol Hill's columns, untrue remarks were made by Colonel Hobby, the Secretary of War, Henry Louis Stimson, President Roosevelt, and First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. They all spoke out. And here's at the bottom here on our right, you see the very last paragraph. Mrs. Franklin D. Roosevelt said yesterday, when asked about reports of promiscuity among WACs, that it was a lot of Nazi propaganda. It was, and she said the same reports have been current with the British and Canadian auxiliary organizations overseas. This is a lot of what these poor women had to undergo, and they took it very seriously. On June 3rd, or excuse me, on July 3rd, 1943, it was also found, I wanted to point out another thing here about all this, that an internal investigation within the Army intelligence found that some of the worst slander against the WACs came from the enlisted men within. And the motive is very simple. The more WACs the Army accepted, the more soldiers were sent overseas. Many wives, girlfriends, mothers, sisters, and aunts were not eager to have their men sent into combat because their non-combat job had been taken over by a WAC. Many local civilians of the military posts did not like seeing their public places, such as diners and movie theaters, filled up with WACs because it made them uncomfortable and their own access more difficult. The smear campaign had serious effects as the number of women joining the Army fell off drastically. On July 3rd, 1943, President Roosevelt signed the bill to establish the Women's Army Corps in the Army of the United States. Finally, Rogers's bill, the true bill she wanted, they were going to be part of the Army. On July 5th, Director Veda Kulp Hobby took the oath of office as a colonel in the Army of the United States and became the first woman admitted to the Women's Army Corps. Members of the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps were given 90 days to either enlist or become commissioned into the Women's Army Corps or discharged by September 3rd, 1943. when WAAC would cease to WAAC with two A's would cease to exist. When the Women's Army Corps Bill was signed, WACs were given the choice to enlist in the Women's Army Corps, as I said, or accept a discharge to civilian life. At the same time, there were several other blows that were impacting the WAC. The Army lowered the standards for women. The recruiters could now accept candidates before their blood test results were known. And if the recruit was positive for a sexually transmitted disease, they were discharged. Educational requirements were abolished, and an aptitude test score of 50 was considered passing, and no background check was required. By June of 1943, not only were the numbers of new recruits down substantially, but it was found by WAC staff that 70% of these new recruits were classified as semi-skilled, unskilled, domestic service, or laborer. Many women only had an 8th grade education or less. Their medical standards were also inadequate. 74% of the women were discharged for gynecological problems or mental health conditions. By changing the status of WAC to full military status, there were, though, important changes that occurred. The age limit was changed from 21 to 45 to 20 to 49. It gave the same rate. This gave the same rates and ranks for women as those of male soldiers, but it limited the highest rank to lieutenant colonel for officers. Only the director could hold a higher level. The law granted WACs the same pay, allowances, benefits, and privileges as male soldiers, except regarding dependent pay for a spouse and dependents. Unlike males, women had to prove that they contributed to at least 50% of their husband's financial support to claim him as a dependent. The Army also held that WACs were non-combatants and could not be assigned to combat areas. But women, this continued to be stationed in combat areas regardless of the rules. Women were now permitted to carry a sidearm, usually a Colt 45, when security precautions were advised. Women could marry without permission from their CEO, and single WACs could receive a medical discharge for pregnancy. Single WACs received medical care in Army hospitals up to and through the baby's birth. Like I said before, about 25% of the women chose to be discharged without re-enlisting into the Women's Army Corps. But these women also experienced artillery attacks, bombing raids, strafing, rocket attacks while serving in combat zones of war. It was a myth that American women did not serve in harm's way. Women were killed in action and survivors of ship attacks and sinkings while performing their duty. August 15th, 1945 was the official day of the Japanese surrender and the end of World War II. And I'm sorry, I got so carried away, I didn't give you that beautiful poster very long. This was the VJ Day, and it was the end of World War II. For the first time in US history, thousands of women veterans would return to the world they had left behind. They found their attitudes and goals had changed significantly. American society was eager to have the women leave the workforce and return to normalcy, to the pre-war days. The advantage would favor male veterans. A return to normalcy meant reinstating standards of gender roles of pre-war days. Military instructors informed women it was time to become ladies and clean up their language. Even before they returned to outside the military bases, female soldiers, sailors, Marines, and Coast Guard personnel were required by their branches to attend military classes on what was expected of them after they were discharged and transitioned into civilian life. And here's a wonderful quote by an Army nurse that I just loved, Lieutenant Frances Marinick. She said, "We had never stopped being ladies. The very idea that there was something wrong with us because we had been behind the front lines caring for our wounded GIs was ridiculous. The implication was that our military experience made us less than acceptable in post-war society America." So I have right here, and I've scanned it for you, and we'll look through back to the Civvies. This was required reading for women who were returning back to military service. This was what they went to school for. This one happens to be for the waves, it's a Navy related one. And it tells you here, you have been the best dressed woman in America. Your uniform was designed by a famous designer and your hat by a master milliner. You've been smart from the top to toe. Now you must translate that smartness into your own terms as an individual, as a civilian. Now, I'm not going to go through every single thing in here because it just is wow. But you can see that it's like now you're on your own. And who are you? And you see down here on the left-hand side, what do I want to look like? If the answer is pretty, then choose a feminine hat, soft dresses. Smart, then a few very smooth clothes for you. Crisp, then stick to tailored clothing. And you plan your wardrobe and your color scheme. And you put bright accents on neutral backgrounds. And now you are ready to shop. You've done your homework in your military thing on the colors. You know your colors, you know what looks good on you. So now you're ready to buy your fashion. And always on the right-hand side, always remember that simplicity is the keynote of dressing smartly. And as you can see from these cartoons, you don't want too deep armholes, and you don't want too wide shoulders, and you definitely don't want to be nipped in the waist. Then it goes on into your hat and good grooming and your hairdo, what type of accessories you need. Shoes may be one of two types, very low heels and simple, high heels and very simple. Keep it simple, clearly, is the key here. What about your uniform? You can remove your blue uniform and sew on plain buttons, and but you don't want to cut it, decorate it, remodel it, or otherwise change it. It was designed by a fine designer, and if you are tired of it, hang it up in the closet after you've changed the buttons. Don't look at it again until next season, then treat it as your smart tailored suit and do any of these things with it. You can wear a gay hat and bright checked or striped scarf. You may wear a bright green or yellow blouse or shocking pink or frilly white dicky. Add the most feminine of hats. Your blouses, it tells you what kind to go. Get a turtleneck, soft blouses, your separates or skirts, smooth, wide belts. You want to look put together. It ends, of course, with your coat and raincoat. Now you get to your budget. And based on your budget and what you're going to do when you return to civilian life, you're either a girl with a job who wears a suit, or a girl with a job who wears a dress, or on the last page, you are the young housewife. And here on this last page is your workplace, so you can figure out exactly what you need. I'm going to show you, I put this all together so we can kind of look at what all the different things were. Of course, for the women, they needed one coat. And as you can see, the young housewife, her coat actually, and the dress, they needed a $5 coat. It cost a little bit more. Come on, let's go to the next. Oh, there we go. Then we have the blouse. We have two blouses or a shirt, jersey shirt for the young wife. Then we have for the girl who wears a suit, she only gets one soft dress, date dress. However, the girl that is wearing the dress on the job gets a rayon flannel dress and a corduroy rayon gabardine or woolen rayon dress. And if you're the young housewife, you get 3 dresses. You get a good crepe dress or 2 cotton dresses at $5 each. Of course, no woman went without her hat. If you only wear a suit, you only get 1 hat, sorry, but if you are wearing a dress, you get a jersey cap. And if you're a young housewife, you get a felt hat and a good, frivolous, but good hat. Of course, everyone gets fabric gloves. If you have a job, you get fabric gloves. But if you're a young housewife, you get leather gloves. And if you have this job, of course, you need a handbag. But if you're a young housewife, you don't need a handbag. You can just do without that $7.50 expense. Only if you're a girl with a dress do you get a leather belt. No, you have a suit or you're a young housewife, no belt for you. And finally, we have your scarf. Although if you have a suit, you get a 50-cent more expensive scarf and you make some more. So now our totals come into actually the girl with the dress has the most. She comes in about $2.50 or $1.50 more. And the young housewife comes in with the least, but she's right up there in the 190s too. This is a wonderful quote by the Second Lieutenant Margaret F. Baber, who was in the Women's Army Corps, the 688th Unit. She was stationed in England, and I loved this quote of hers. Be it known that a more dedicated or disciplined group of individuals cannot be found than those women who braved the onslaught of prejudice and ridicule during World War II and still maintained their dignity. And this is the women's, a Black battalion of Women's Army Corps that I just love this picture. These women were so determined and so proud. I've had the experience of getting to meet some of these women throughout my life, and every single one of them were so proud of their service. And you can see why all that they went through, and then they came back not as heroes, but as they didn't get the hero welcome that the men did. And they fought just as hard and were just as proud of their service. And they got a double whammy when they weren't even included in most of the history books. And that's what we have to right these wrongs. These women did these amazing things, and they worked their butts off, and we owe them so much for really paving the way for women and the job opportunities that we have today, not only in the military, but throughout our country. So that's my presentation now. And I'll be happy to take some questions if there are any.
Michelle?
Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. We don't have many questions, but there is a good question, and I'm sorry, I know you went into it for a little bit and I started answering discussion groups. Can you talk a little bit more about the possible segregation that there was, or if there was in the WAAC group between the white and the non-white women?
Yes, I can only tell you that what I found amazing was that the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps really were one of the most amazing, inclusive, I thought at times very forward thinking. These women, they trained along with the women, as I said. They kept their own barracks. They were kind of segregated that way. They also weren't allowed until near the end of the war to go overseas, just like in World War I, where the African-American women were stationed in the States. they didn't get to go overseas until right near the end of the war. And these women, who I took the quote from, they served. They weren't even allowed to work on anyone but African American soldiers up until that time. And it wasn't until things got really bad and they were needing, there was such a shortage of hands that they were finally able to do work with men and women of other colors. And it blows my mind that these women were so brave and so amazing. It's just.
You're so right, Michelle. I know you mentioned it there towards the end. We talk about here a lot about telling, women's stories and making sure that their history is shared and told and remembered. A lot has changed in the military, and there's a lot more discussion and inclusion about women's role in the military and what that has looked like. Do you know of, and your work on this, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot if you don't know the answer, in your research and so forth, did you find anywhere that had great exhibits or had a really good interpretation or presentation about the WAACs here in the United States? Do you know of anyone? And it's okay. Again, I'm sorry if I put you on the spot on that.
Gosh, yeah. I know that there are, I can't think of the name of it. There's a women's museum out west. I'm so sorry. I'm
it's fine. I put you on the spot on that one. I know I did. I was just curious if you came across, because there were several people asking about, where locally they could go, not locally here, but in their own areas where they might find more information.
There are some amazing books. There needs to be more. And we really need to get out there and tell these stories. This presentation was so much fun. Even when I started this, I've learned so much myself. We always come at war from the First Lady's point of view so much of the time. But we use these types of things to talk about women's roles within war. And so this was a really great chance to share with all of you and learn myself more about this Women's Army Auxiliary Corps. I'm just blown away by the women who served during World War II. Such pioneers.
And I know, and I know in the comments, Cindy, I'm seeing you've mentioned a few times about Fort Lee has an exhibit as well.
Thank you. Yes.
I was out in Richmond. I was just looking for others as well.
Yes.
We've got people, Ed has commented as well.
Good. Please help me out.
So it was fine. I just wanted to make sure if you had. We have someone else who's asking, in your research, did you come across the work of, Lillian Muller Gilbreth?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh my gosh. Yes, I did. Oh, I couldn't, you have to pick and choose. And I loved her. She's amazing. Yes. I actually had her at one point in the presentation. I had to take her out.
It's hard. I know. So 45 minutes to an hour.
Exactly.
It's hard to go over it. We should do series of everything. I know it.
Right.
I know a few people in chat and in question have asked about the WASPs as well, which is another.
I didn't even mention them, the WASP.
Right, which is another women's, they were the pilots, so there was another women's auxiliary group. So
yes, absolutely.
For sure that, they're another group of women who served in the military, as many have that have amazing stories to tell.
Yes.
And
I read, there's some wonderful books out there.
Yes, that was my next question. If you have any suggestions of books.
I got a lot of really good information from a few good women. It's written by Evelyn Monahan and Rosemary Needle Greenlee. it's a little bit dated, but it's pretty new too. But it was excellent in really kind of giving you little vignettes of a lot of these wonderful women and their stories. Is so wonderful. And then another book that I really liked was These Wonderful Women and Their Flying Machines. Lots of information, not just about the women who were, but it covered a lot of other different things. And there were others, but those two I really got a lot of really good information from.
Well, Michelle, thank you so much. As always, we're so grateful for anyone who serves in the military, but thank you for sharing the story of these wonderful women who've served in our military. It really, every time we do one of these series on women in the military, it just warms my heart to bring to light their stories. And again, we could talk about this all evening. So thank you.
We women owe them so much.
We absolutely do. So we thank all of you for attending. We have, as Michelle mentioned, we have many wonderful programs coming up. Our next one about the future role of the First Ladies. It should be a very exciting program. That's on September 9th. Of course, our Eleanor Book Club is coming up, on Monday. And we have really fantastic speakers coming up. Amy Greenberg, who wrote the Sarah Polk book, will be speaking. Elaine Weiss, who wrote Women's Hours, will be one of our guest speakers that's coming up. So we have really exciting things coming up. So hopefully you'll watch and stay connected with us and sign up. We wish you all a wonderful, wonderful evening. And we look forward to seeing you all very soon again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.